Hello, Eternal Life fans. It's Rowan from the Eternal Life Fan Club. And today we're going to talk about why Jane Eyre is such an awesome character. I just watched the movie Jane Eyre, and I noticed some great virtues about this girl that I think we should put on a pedestal. And, you can use Jane Eyre as one of these examples of someone to be like. So, the first thing I noticed is that Jane Eyre is highly moral. We never saw her do anything immoral or degenerate throughout the film. She wasn't a slut. All right, she was into purity and to staying pure, until she got married, right? So she was like really moral. So that's the first thing. And there's other ways she was moral. Like there was one part in the movie where she was, she had gained this friend as a child, and she was very nice to her friend, right? So we saw her relationships with other people, and her friend was dying, and she even laid with her dying friend to comfort her friend. Now, as someone who wants to live forever and trying to avoid risks, I wouldn't necessarily promote possibly getting a contagious disease, right? Because her friend could have had this illness, so but maybe Jane Eyre didn't know any better, because maybe they just didn't know that these diseases were contagious like that. But the gesture of kindness is still there, so we can understand that Jane Eyre was compassionate. She cared about people, and things like that. She's just a good person. Just all throughout the film, you can tell she just was a good person. The next thing is, she was very judgmental. A very judgmental girl. Now, how do we know she was judgmental? Well, at one point in the film, she was bullied and she got hit in the head and she was bleeding on the forehead. And she was judgmental in that she retaliated back and started fighting this guy and hitting this guy who hurt her. So that shows she's got a judgmental spirit. At one point in the film, someone even described her as having a heart of spite. Okay, so she has this inner judgmental fire, this spite. Okay, it's similar to Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell, she gets a little hot-headed, she gets a little angry, and she judges people. Okay, so there's that Tinkerbell judgmental spirit in Jane Eyre. And another way that Jane Eyre was judgmental is that she was very honest. And that's part of being a judgmental person, is that you're honest when you talk to people. You tell it how it is, the brutal truth. And you can tell when Jane Eyre was having conversations with Mr. Rochester, her love interest. She didn't she wasn't, she was just truthful, right? She was just blunt and honest. And that's part of being a judgmental person. And there was other ways she was judgmental. She was judgmental to this mean lady who was, I think, maybe her aunt or something, or she was caretaking her as a child. And she was judgmental back to this lady who was mean and stuff. So, she's just very judgmental spirit.
You said I was a liar. I'm not. If I were to say I loved you, and I don't, I dislike you less than anybody in the world. People think you are good, but you are bad and hard-hearted.
The next thing about Jane Eyre is that she cared about her health. At one point in the movie, she even said, well, first of all, we can see that she wasn't fat, okay, so she wasn't obese or anything, so that shows she was moderate with her diet, right? She wasn't overeating, gluttonous and everything. But at one point in the film, she even said, I must keep in good health and not die.
I must keep in good health and not die.
So Jane Eyre was all about, being healthy, trying to live forever, things like that. And that's awesome. And that's part of morality. That ties into her being such a moral person. It's like she cared about herself. At one point in the film, she even said she has to respect herself.
I must respect myself.
Right? She was a self-respecting person with a lot of self-love. She cared about respecting herself and doing the right thing for herself. And part of that is health, of course. Because if you respect yourself, you're going to be healthy and you're going to try to live forever. The next thing is that Jane Eyre was very God-fearing. There was a scene in the movie where she talked about her parents who had died, and she said her parents were in heaven judging this mean lady who was her guardian at the time, right? I forgot, it was the aunt or something. And she said her parents were judging this lady from heaven.
You're passionate.
My Uncle Reed is in heaven. So are my mother and father. They know how you hate me and wish me dead. They see everything you do, and they will judge you, Mrs. Reed.
Get out.
So she had this idea that there's divine retribution, that there's judgment, that there's this either, I guess her parents, she probably thought her parents were like saints in heaven and were going to judge, part of the judgment, the system of judgment. Some people think that not only does the hypothetical God judge people, but they think there's like angels or saints that get to partake in this kind of judgment, where they're observing everyone and they're going to judge people. Well, Jane Eyre was a believer in that. So clearly, probably why she's such a moral person and everything is because she had this really God-fearing attitude. I doubt it's a coincidence that, she's this very moral person and then she just so happens to believe in these people judging, her parents going to be these judgmental people in heaven, judging mortal beings, right? And that whole thing. So it's probably ties into that. It's why she's so moral, is because she's God-fearing. Also, her lifestyle kind of fits with the God-fearing thing. She wasn't like super religious reading the Bible all the time, but you can tell through her lifestyle, her actions, that she feared God, or at least feared the possibility of God. And so that's awesome. That's what we should all do. It's like, talk is cheap, it's our actions that count, right? You can say you're the most religious person ever. You can be like these Bible readers and these Bible thumpers. But unless you have the actions, it's kind of all worthless. So Jane Eyre might not have been the most devout with reading the Bible all the time. They didn't really go into that. But she was devout insofar as her behaviors. She was virtuous, and that's what counts. Actions count. I'm not saying the Bible is like the rule book or everything. I'm not saying the Bible is the rule book of God or anything, but it's possible, and I like to read the Bible from time to time and get ideas about what might be the rules of the hypothetical God, because it's all just a question mark. We really don't know, but it could be that the Bible had gotten some things right. Like the Bible could have some of the accurate rules of the hypothetical God. So we should take that into consideration. And Jane Eyre was like raised in this religious culture where she was just like going to a religious school where they're preaching the Bible at her, probably quoting Bible verses and everything. And so she probably had, just by the nature of being raised a particular way in this religious culture with this religious school, she was just surrounded by like Christianity and Christian morals. And that could have had a lot to do with why she became such a moral person, is that kind of upbringing and being indoctrinated with all this Christian morality. And anyways, Jane Eyre's just a great character. I recommend watching the movie and try taking a lesson or two from Jane Eyre. And she set a good example. Also, note, here's another cool thing about Jane Eyre. In the movie, it was stated that she's plain. A few times people said, she even called herself plain and little.
Do you think that because I am poor, obscure, plain and little, that I am soulless and heartless?
And other people had referred to Jane Eyre as being plain as well. Which is interesting, there's that whole saying of the plain Jane. And what's really cool about that is that her plainness, Jane Eyre, right? She didn't like adorn herself with a bunch of jewelry and makeup and everything. But that didn't subtract from her beauty. She was beautiful in being plain, which is cool. Yeah. So really just a good example all around. Probably, especially for girls, can take some examples, take some advice from Jane Eyre, like as an example of not to be so degenerate and slutty in this day and age. You see a lot of girls being promiscuous and degenerate, slutty, and yuck. You know, they're going out looking like prostitutes and whores and everything. So Jane Eyre's a good refreshing example of what a girl could be. And yeah. It'd be good if there was more of those type of girls nowadays, but not many of them. Not many of them. All right, thank you. And may you live forever. And I bet you all of these qualities that Jane Eyre has are going to help us live forever. If we could just take these qualities and give them to ourselves, we'll be better off in regards to our own eternal life. So, may you live forever.